My name is Maya, I am 24 years old, and my mother, Evelyn Sterling, keeps a black leather book in her safe that she calls the Amortization Schedule of Maya. It isn't a photo album or a baby book, it is a financial ledger where she has meticulously recorded every cent spent on my existence since the day she brought me home. Every calorie of food, every thread of clothing, every kilowatt of electricity I have consumed for 2 decades. Last night she sat me down at the marble kitchen island, opened the book to page 400, and pointed to the final figure in red ink. $1,245,000. This is your current deficit, Maya, she said, her voice as smooth and cold as the diamond choker around her neck. You are not a daughter, you are a distressed asset. And until you work off this debt, you belong to us. Body, labor, on and future. She closed the book with a heavy thud that sounded like a prison door slamming shut. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply stared at the manicured hand resting on the leather cover and realized that my life wasn't a tragedy. It was a long con. They hadn't raised me to love me. They had raised me to be a ghost employee, a human shield with no paper trail, no legal rights, and no way out. What Evelyn didn't know was that I had started keeping my own ledger 3 years ago, not of money, but of crimes. I know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. I know about the Ponzi scheme Arthur is running through his failing hedge fund, and I know exactly why they kept me undocumented all these years. But before I tell you how I turned their own greed into a federal indictment that destroyed their dynasty in a single afternoon, and I need you to hit that like button and subscribe, because the truth is the only weapon I have left. And tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like you were just a tool for someone else's success? I read every single story. Now, let's go back to the morning the trap was set. The Sterling estate in Westchester is a fortress of white brick and dark secrets, designed to look like the American dream, but functioning like a minimum security prison. My official role was estate manager, but my real job was to be the invisible infrastructure of their lives. I woke at 4 a.m., not to an alarm, but to the fear that if the coffee wasn't brewed to exactly 198 degrees by 5:30, Arthur would dock wages from a paycheck I never received. Arthur Sterling was a man drowning in debt, but swimming in arrogance. His hedge fund, Sterling Capital, was bleeding money, millions of dollars of client funds missing, siphoned off to pay for the Ferraris, the galas, and the illusion of success. I knew this because I was the one who shredded the angry letters from the SEC. I was the one who hid the foreclosure notices under the Persian rugs. They thought I was too stupid to understand the financial jargon, but I had read every document I was told to destroy. And then there was Julian, the golden son, 26 years old and rotting from the inside out. Julian was the reason I was truly afraid. He wasn't just spoiled, he was a predator who needed a victim to feel powerful. He played a game with me called the integrity test. He would plant money, a crisp $100 bill under a rug, a diamond earring in the laundry, a gold watch in the sofa cushions, just to see if I would take it. He wanted to catch me stealing so he could hold it over my head, so he could say, "I own you." But I never took the bait. Instead, I photographed every planted item with a burner phone I kept hidden in a hollowed-out dictionary in my basement room. I logged the serial numbers of the bills. I was building a dossier. But the dynamic in the house had shifted recently. The cruelty had become sharper, more desperate. I overheard Arthur and Evelyn arguing in the library 2 nights ago. "The SEC is closing in, Arthur," Evelyn had hissed. "If they audit the firm, we're finished. We need a fall guy." And Arthur had replied, his voice chillingly calm. "We have one. Maya has no identity, no digital footprint. We open a shell company in her name, dump the toxic assets there, and when the feds come knocking, she's the CEO of the fraud. Who are they going to believe, the undocumented orphan or the Sterling family?" My blood ran cold. That was the plan. I wasn't just a servant, I was the scapegoat. I was being fattened up for the slaughter. They were going to frame me for millions of dollars of fraud and let me rot in federal prison while they walked away clean. That realization killed the last terrified girl inside me and birthed something else. A cold, calculating operator. I knew I had to act, and I knew exactly when to strike. The Montgomery merger. Arthur's last desperate Hail Mary to save his firm was to merge with the Montgomery Group, a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm from Boston run by Grant Montgomery. The deal was contingent on Julian marrying Grant's daughter, Vanessa. It was a transaction of blood and money. And the signing ceremony and engagement party were scheduled for today. Grant Montgomery was coming to the estate. I had researched Grant. He was a man of integrity, a philanthropist, a man who had lost his sister and niece in a kidnapping tragedy 20 years ago. He was the only variable Arthur couldn't control. The morning of the arrival, the house was a pressure cooker. I was polishing the silver in the dining room when Julian walked in. He was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than my entire lifetime debt. He stopped beside me, leaning in close, smelling of expensive scotch and malice. "You look tired, Maya," he sneered. "Don't worry. After the merger, things are going to change for you. Dad has a special assignment for you. You're going to be famous." He laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl, and dropped a folded piece of paper onto the table. "Clean this up." It was a subpoena from the Department of Justice, addressed to Sterling Capital. He was mocking me with the evidence of his own crimes, confident that I was too powerless to do anything about it. I pocketed the paper the second he left the room. Evidence number 42. At 11 a.m., the convoy arrived. 3 black Escalades rolled up the driveway, flanking a vintage Rolls-Royce. The Sterlings stood on the porch, a tableau of fake perfection. Arthur checked his watch. Evelyn checked her makeup. Julian checked his reflection. They looked like royalty. I watched from the shadows of the foyer, invisible in my black uniform. The heavy oak doors swung open, and Grant Montgomery stepped out. He was different from the men Arthur usually did business with. He didn't look at the house. He didn't look at the cars. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had seen the hollowness of wealth. Beside him was Vanessa, looking fragile and nervous. Arthur stepped forward, booming his greeting. "Grant, welcome to the family." He went to shake Grant's hand, but Grant's attention was elsewhere. He was scanning the periphery, his eyes darting around the estate with an intensity that unsettled everyone. "Arthur," Grant said, his voice deep and guarded. "Thank you." He stepped into the foyer and the light from the crystal chandelier hit his face. I was standing by the coat closet holding a tray of hot towels. I stepped forward to offer one to him, keeping my head down as per rule number 4. Eye contact is insubordination. "May I take your coat, sir?" I whispered. Grant paused. He froze in the middle of removing his scarf. He didn't move for a solid 5 seconds. Then, slowly, terrifyingly, he turned to look at me. He didn't look at my face first. He looked at my wrist. My right wrist, where a jagged, star-shaped birthmark, something Evelyn had always told me was an ugly scar from a cigarette burn I got before they adopted me, was visible just below the cuff of my uniform. Grant reached out, his hand trembling violently, and seized my wrist. Arthur gasped. "Grant, what are you doing? That's just the help." Grant didn't hear him. He was staring at the birthmark, his face draining of all color, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and impossible hope. He looked up from my wrist to my face, and for the first time in 23 years I looked a man in the eye and saw recognition. "Alice?" he breathed, the name barely a whisper, but in the silence of the foyer it sounded like a gunshot. "Alice, is that you?" The tray of towels slipped from my hand, crashing onto the marble floor. The sound echoed like an explosion. Evelyn lunged forward, her mask of perfection cracking. "Grant, you're mistaken. This is Maya. She's nobody. She's a charity case we picked up from the Bronx." But Grant didn't let go of my wrist. His grip tightened, protective, desperate. He looked at Arthur, then at Evelyn, and the sorrow in his eyes was instantly replaced by a cold, lethal fury. "Nobody?" Grant said, his voice rising, shaking the walls of the fake palace. This birthmark. My sister Clara drew this shape in her diary 1,000 times. It's not a scar. It's a genetic marker. This is my niece. This is the girl you stole. The air left the room. Arthur's face went gray. Julian took a step back. And I stood there, the debt ledger in my mind finally balancing out, realizing that the man holding my arm wasn't just a business partner. He was the hammer I was going to use to smash the Sterling dynasty into dust. The silence in the foyer following Grant's declaration was heavy enough to crush bones, but Arthur Sterling was a master of constructing reality out of thin air, and he didn't miss a beat. He laughed, a booming, condescending sound that echoed off the marble walls, and placed a heavy hand on Grant's shoulder, effectively breaking the physical connection between the billionaire and me. "Grant, my old friend," Arthur said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "I know the anniversary of the incident is approaching, and grief plays terrible tricks on the mind, but this is Maya. We have her papers. We have the adoption records from the state. She's a troubled girl from a broken home in the Bronx, whom we've tried to rehabilitate, but she's prone to fantasies." He shot a look at Evelyn, a silent command to remove the evidence. Evelyn moved with the speed of a viper. Her fingers dug into my bicep, her nails piercing the fabric of my uniform as she yanked me back into the shadows. "I am so sorry, Grant," she purred, her voice trembling with a perfect practiced performance of embarrassment. "Maya has a condition. She sometimes mimics things she hears. Please, come into the library. You need a drink." Grant looked at me one last time, his eyes burning with a conflict between his logic and his instinct, before Arthur physically steered him away toward the drawing room. As soon as the heavy oak doors clicked shut, the performance dropped. Evelyn didn't just walk me to the kitchen, she dragged me. She threw me against the stainless steel refrigerator with enough force to rattle the magnets. "You stupid, ungrateful little parasite," she hissed, her face inches from mine, her breath smelling of mint and rot. "You hold your arm out? You let him see that mark? Do you have any idea what you just risked?" She marched to the pantry safe and pulled out the debt ledger, slamming it onto the counter. She uncapped a red pen and furiously scribbled a new entry. "Embarrassing the family in front of a key investor. $50,000. That brings your total to nearly 1.3 million, Maya. You will never leave this house. You will die working off this balance." She didn't wait for a response. She grabbed a bottle of wine and stormed out to repair the damage, locking the kitchen door from the outside. I was trapped, but I wasn't helpless. I slid to the floor, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my mind was racing. Arthur's lie about adoption papers was flimsy. Grant was too smart to believe it forever. But he needed proof, and I needed to give it to him before Arthur could make me disappear. I crawled to the hidden vent behind the stove where I kept my burner phone, a cheap prepaid device I had bought with cash stolen from Julian's laundry years ago, and checked my insurance policy. For the past 6 months, I had been gathering more than just dust in this house. I knew about the invisible test Julian played. He would leave cash lying around, a $100 bill on the carpet, a diamond earring on the sink, waiting for me to take it so he could call the police and have me arrested for theft. He wanted leverage. He wanted to own me. But I had turned the game around. I had photos of every planted bill. I had recorded the serial numbers. And more importantly, I had found the documents in Arthur's home office trash that he thought were shredded. They weren't just in debt. They were criminals running a massive Ponzi scheme. They had been using new investors' money to pay off old ones for years, and the well was dry. The Montgomery merger wasn't an investment. It was a bailout to cover a $40 million hole before the SEC audit next week. And then I remembered the conversation I had overheard in the library 2 nights ago, the one that made my blood run cold. Arthur had told Julian, "We need a fall guy, someone with no history. We set up the shell company in Maya's name. We sign the toxic assets over to her. When the feds come, they arrest the CEO of Maya Holdings, and we claim we were duped by a rogue employee." That was the plan. I wasn't just a servant. I was the escape hatch. They were going to frame me for a federal crime I didn't commit, using my lack of identity to paint me as a ghost criminal. I looked at the burner phone in my hand. I had the photos. I had the recordings. And now, I had Grant Montgomery, the man who knew the truth about my birthmark, sitting in the other room. The kitchen door handle jiggled, then opened. It wasn't Evelyn. It was Julian. He slipped inside, closing the door softly behind him. He wasn't angry. He was smiling, a wet, predatory grin that was far more terrifying than his rage. "Mom is upset," he said softly, walking toward me. "But I told her not to worry. Dad convinced Grant he was hallucinating. He's drinking scotch now, signing the preliminary NDAs." He stopped in front of me, reaching out to touch a lock of my hair. I flinched, but I didn't pull away. "You know, Maya," he whispered, "next week, you're going to be famous. You're going to be the face of Sterling Capital. We're finally going to give you a title. CEO. Doesn't that sound nice?" He laughed, patting my cheek. "Enjoy your last few days of freedom, little ghost. Because once those papers are signed tomorrow, you're going to federal prison for a very, very long time." He left, whistling a tune, leaving me alone in the cold, sterile kitchen. He thought he had won. He thought I was terrified. And I was. But he forgot one thing. Ghosts are very good at listening. And I had just pressed record on my phone the second he walked in. I had his confession. Now I just needed to survive the night and get this phone to Grant Montgomery without getting killed. The night fell over the Sterling estate like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. The dinner party had moved to the patio, where Arthur was loudly toasting to future prosperity, while Grant sat in silence, nursing a single glass of water. I watched them from the window of the upstairs linen closet, my designated station during evening events. I saw the way Grant's eyes kept drifting back to the house, to the windows, searching. He hadn't bought Arthur's lie. He was a man who built an empire on spotting fraud. And tonight, he smelled it. But Arthur was desperate, and desperation makes men dangerous. I knew that if I tried to approach Grant now, with Julian patrolling the perimeter like a prison guard, I would be intercepted. I needed a way to force a meeting on my terms, in a place where the Sterlings couldn't control the narrative. My opportunity came at 2 a.m. The house was quiet. The guests retired to the east wing. I crept down the service stairs, avoiding the third step that always creaked, a habit learned from years of invisible survival. I made my way to the guest suite where Grant was staying. The door was locked, but the estate manager has keys to everything. I didn't enter. Instead, I slid a single piece of paper under the door. It wasn't a note. It was a photocopy I had made years ago from the forbidden box in Arthur's safe, a copy of a birth certificate issued in Boston 24 years ago for a baby named Alice Montgomery, next to a photo of my own wrist with the star-shaped birthmark. I had kept it hidden in the lining of my mattress, my only proof that I wasn't crazy. I knocked once. Softly. 3 rapid taps, and vanished into the shadows of the hallway alcove. 30 seconds later, the door opened. Grant stepped out barefoot, wearing a silk robe, holding the paper. His hands were shaking. He looked left, then right, his eyes adjusting to the dark. "Alice?" he whispered into the void. "I know you're there." I stepped out from behind the tapestry, pressing a finger to my lips. He rushed toward me, not with the stride of a billionaire, but with the frantic energy of a man seeing a ghost. He reached for me, but I took a step back. "Not here," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "The cameras. They have audio in the hallways." I pointed to the small red light blinking on the ceiling smoke detector, another secret the Sterlings thought I didn't know. I led him to the one place in the house Arthur never monitored because he considered it beneath him, the basement laundry room. Under the hum of the dehumidifier, surrounded by the Sterlings' dirty linens, Grant Montgomery fell to his knees. He grabbed my hands, turning them over to look at the birthmark again, tracing the shape with his thumb. Tears streamed down his face. Raw, ugly, silent tears. "We looked for you," he choked out. "We never stopped. Clara, your mother, she spent every penny she had. She died thinking she failed you." The mention of my mother, a woman I had never known, whose grief had killed her, broke something inside me. The wall I had built to survive the Sterlings crumbled. "They told me she threw me away," I said, my voice cracking. "They told me I was trash left at a fire station." "They lied," Grant said, his voice hardening into steel. "You were taken from the hospital nursery. A nurse was paid off. The FBI tracked the money to a shell company, but the trail went cold. It was a customized theft, Alice. Someone ordered you." He stood up, the grief in his eyes replaced by a cold, calculating fury that terrified me. "I'm taking you out of here. Now. My security team is outside the gate. We walk out the front door, and if Arthur tries to stop us, I will bury him." He reached for his phone. "No," I said, grabbing his arm. "If we leave now, they win." Grant looked at me, confused. "What do you mean? You're free." "I'm not free as long as they have the power to spin this," I said, the plan forming in my mind like a crystallized diamond. "Arthur has destroyed the physical records. He'll claim I'm an imposter. A mentally ill servant he tried to help. He'll say you're a grieving old man being manipulated. He has lawyers, Grant. He has the media. And tomorrow, he plans to frame me for $50 million in fraud." I pulled out my burner phone and played the recording of Julian from the kitchen. "Once those papers are signed, you're going to federal prison, CEO of Maya Holdings." Grant listened, his face turning the color of ash. "They want to make you the fall guy for the Ponzi scheme," he realized. "They want to merge with my company to get the liquidity to cover their tracks, then pin the past crimes on you." "Exactly," I said. "So we don't leave. We let them think they've won. We let them sit at that table tomorrow. We let them sign the papers that link your clean money to their dirty firm. And then, when the ink is wet, we reveal who I really am. We don't just arrest them, Grant. We destroy their reputation, their finances, and their freedom in one stroke. We make sure that when they go to prison, everyone knows they didn't just steal money. They stole a child." Grant looked at me, really looked at me, and saw the daughter of his sister. He saw the same steel, the same intelligence. He nodded slowly. "The signing is at noon. I will have the FBI Human Trafficking Division and the SEC on standby. I will sign the merger, but I will add a clause they won't read. A clause that triggers an immediate external audit upon signature." He squeezed my hand. "Can you do this? Can you play the servant for one more morning?" "I've been playing the servant for 24 years, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "One more breakfast won't kill me, but it will kill them." We parted ways. I went back to my basement room, but I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed watching the sun come up, feeling the weight of the debt ledger hanging over my head. Arthur thought I owed him a life. Today I was going to collect the refund. The library clock chimed noon, a sound that felt less like a marker of time and more like a tolling bell for an execution. The room smelled of old paper, polished mahogany, and the thick, desperate greed radiating from the Sterling family. Arthur sat behind his massive desk, sweating through his bespoke suit, his hands trembling slightly as he arranged the merger documents. Evelyn stood by the window, nervously smoothing her skirt, while Julian paced the rug like a caged tiger, checking his phone every 30 seconds. They were terrified, but they were also ecstatic. They believed that with one signature from Grant Montgomery, their $40 million debt would vanish, and their crimes would be buried forever under a mountain of fresh capital. I stood in the corner, holding a tray of crystal flutes and a bottle of Dom Perignon, yet invisible as always. Grant sat opposite Arthur, flanked by two men in dark suits introduced as his corporate counsel. Arthur didn't notice that the suits were off the rack, or that the men wore earpieces. He was too focused on the checkbook. The terms are standard, Grant, Arthur said, pushing a thick stack of papers across the desk. Full acquisition of sterling capital assets, assumption of liabilities, and, of course, the restructuring plan. He tapped a specific page. This includes the transfer of our high-risk assets to the new subsidiary, Maya Holdings, effective immediately. He glanced at me, a flicker of cruel amusement in his eyes. He was doing it. He was signing my death warrant right in front of me, legally framing me for his Ponzi scheme. Grant didn't pick up the pen. He picked up the document, reading it slowly. Maya Holdings, he said, his voice flat. And the CEO of this new entity will be Maya Sterling? Technically, yes. Arthur smiled, a oily, conspiratorial grin. We want to give the girl a chance at leadership. A title. It's a benevolent gesture, really. She'll manage the legacy accounts. I see, Grant said. He closed the folder. I'm prepared to sign, Arthur, but my counsel insists on one final verification. We need the CEO of the acquiring entity to acknowledge the transfer. Arthur frowned. Grant, she's right there. She's the help. She doesn't understand these things. Just give me the pen. Bring her here, Grant commanded. The authority in his voice was absolute. Arthur sighed, annoyed, and snapped his fingers at me. Maya, put down the tray. Come here. Just nod at whatever, mister. Montgomery says so we can get this over with. I set the tray down on the side table. The glass clinked, a sharp, deliberate sound. I didn't walk with my head down. I didn't hunch my shoulders. I walked to the desk with the posture of a woman who owned the room. I stood next to Grant, facing Arthur. Do you understand the position they are offering you, Maya? Grant asked, looking up at me. Yes, I said, my voice clear and steady. Arthur is appointing me CEO of a shell company designed to absorb $40 million of toxic debt and fraudulent loans. He intends to report the losses to the SEC next week, blame them on my mismanagement, and claim he was a victim of my incompetence. Since I have no legal identity, he believes I will be processed into the federal prison system as a Jane Doe, effectively disappearing forever. The silence in the room was instant and violent. Arthur's face went from annoyed to white-hot shock. Evelyn gasped. Julian froze mid-step. What did you just say? Arthur whispered, standing up slowly. You ungrateful little... I'm not finished, I interrupted him. I reached into my apron pocket. Not for a napkin, but for my burner phone. I placed it on the desk and pressed play. Julian's voice filled the room, recorded from the kitchen. Once those papers are signed tomorrow, you're going to federal prison. Enjoy your last few days of freedom, little ghost. Arthur looked at Julian. Julian looked at the floor. You wiretapped this house? Arthur roared, his face turning purple. I own you. I own the clothes on your back. You have nothing. You are nothing. He lunged for the phone. But the man to Grant's right, the corporate counsel, moved with blurring speed. He caught Arthur's wrist in midair and slammed him back into his leather chair. Federal agents, the man shouted, pulling a badge from his jacket. Arthur Sterling, you are under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, and human trafficking. Trafficking? Arthur sputtered, looking at Grant. Grant, help me. The girl is crazy. She's a mental patient. Grant stood up then. He looked at Arthur with a disgust so profound it seemed to lower the room's temperature. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out the blue folder, the DNA results. He threw it onto the desk. She's not a mental patient, Arthur. She's Alice Montgomery, my niece. Evelyn screamed. It was a short, sharp sound, like a glass breaking. She scrambled backward, knocking over a vase. No, we didn't know. The broker said she was an orphan. We adopted her. Lies, I said. I walked over to Evelyn. She was trembling, backed against the bookshelf. You didn't adopt me. You ordered me. And for 24 years you charged me for my own captivity. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the black leather book she had shown me, the debt ledger. I had stolen it from her safe while she was dressing for the signing, I tossed it onto the floor at her feet. You kept a receipt for a stolen child, Evelyn. That book details every dollar you spent to keep me alive as a slave. Prosecutors love detailed records. The library doors burst open. A tactical team flooded the room, their vests emblazoned with FBI. The chaos was immediate. I watched as they cuffed Julian, who was crying and screaming. It was my dad. I just did what he told me. I'm a victim. I watched them drag Arthur, kicking and cursing, out the door he had walked through like a king only an hour ago. And then there was Evelyn. An agent was fastening the zip ties around her wrists. She looked at me, her mascara running, her face a mask of total ruin. Maya, she sobbed. Please, I'm your mother. I raised you. I leaned in close, so only she could hear. My name isn't Maya, and you didn't raise me, Evelyn. You just kept me in inventory. Grant put his hand on my shoulder. It's over, Alice. Let's go. I turned my back on them as they were led away. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel relief. I felt a cold, heavy satisfaction. The debt was paid. The ledger was closed. But as I walked out of that library, leaving the shattered remains of the Sterling dynasty behind me, I knew one thing. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a Montgomery, and I had a lot of work to do. The flashing lights of the federal convoy painted the Sterling estate in violent strokes of red and blue, a chaotic light show that finally exposed the darkness rotting inside the perfect white brick mansion. I stood on the front lawn, wrapped in a wool coat Grant had placed over my shoulders, watching the royalty of Westchester being paraded out in handcuffs. Arthur was screaming about his lawyers. Julian was sobbing, begging the officers to check his pockets to prove he hadn't stolen anything, reverting to a terrified child now that his power was gone. And Evelyn. Evelyn was silent. She looked at me as they shoved her into the back of a cruiser, her eyes searching for the daughter she thought she owned, but she only found the plaintiff who had just foreclosed on her life. The aftermath was swift, brutal, and public. The debt ledger I had thrown at Evelyn's feet became Exhibit A in the federal trial. Prosecutors called it the most chilling document of modern slavery they had ever seen. It didn't just prove human trafficking, it proved premeditated malice. Every dollar they claimed I owed them was used to calculate their prison sentences. Arthur received 25 years for the Ponzi scheme and human trafficking. Evelyn received 20 years. Julian, whose recording of mocking me as a little ghost was played in open court, destroyed his own defense team's attempt to paint him as a victim. He was sentenced to 8 years. But the sweetest victory wasn't the prison time, it was the financial irony. Remember Maya Holdings? The shell company Arthur forced me to become CEO of to frame me? It turned out that by making me the legal CEO, he had given me the power to waive attorney-client privilege for the corporation. I didn't just hand over the files, I authorized the forensic accountants to gut the entire Sterling empire. I signed the orders to liquidate their offshore accounts, their vacation homes, and their art collection to repay the investors they defrauded. I used the very title they gave me to strip them naked. 6 months later, the Sterling estate was put up for government auction. I bought it. I didn't buy it to live in. I bought it to kill it. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Grant and I stood on the sidewalk with steaming cups of coffee and watched the demolition crew do their work. The wrecking ball crashed through the master bedroom first, then the library, and finally, it pulverized the kitchen where I had spent 20 years of my life. And when the basement, my prison, was finally crushed into rubble, I didn't feel sad. I felt light. I turned to Grant, the uncle who had never stopped looking for me, and handed him the old burner phone. It's done, I said. We donated the land to the city to build a shelter for runaway youth. It seemed fitting. Today, I live in Boston. I'm Alice Montgomery, a first-year law student at Harvard, specializing in human trafficking litigation. I have a trust fund, a family, and a future. But on my desk, framed in simple black wood, is the final page of Evelyn's debt ledger. I keep it there not to remember the pain, but to remember the lesson. They thought they could turn a person into a number, but they forgot that even the smallest number placed in the wrong column can crash the entire system. I was the error in their code. I was the ghost in their machine, and now I am the one writing the rules. Thank you for listening to the story of the Sterling family's downfall. If this story made you feel the fire of justice, please like, subscribe, and share this video, because there are other ghosts out there who need to know they can be seen. I'm Alice, and the archive is closed.